I think a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, and we'll answer some questions and possibly cut it a little short if people don't have, if we kind of get to the end of the questions. But for now, why don't I go ahead and try to play this video of Professor Taylor, and let me know. I will pause the video after just about 30 seconds to make sure everybody can hear it, as I know we've had some issues in the past getting the audio to work on video recordings.
Well, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you again. And what I want to talk about today.
Can everybody hear that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, then I will play it. And as I said, the video is half an hour, and then we will have a discussion afterwards.
Is how to make good photographs for use in social change work. The key phrase here is making the photograph. This is a different idea than taking a picture. And in making the photograph, our purpose is to use the photograph for evidence. Now, in social change, we have 4 principles, and we're going to be talking about the evidence principle later in this course. But the question that comes up all the time is, what is evidence, how to make evidence, how to use evidence, and photographs are one of the most powerful, easy to use, believable by others methods of evidence gathering. So I want to share with you here some tips for how to make photographs that work as evidence.
Sorry, everybody. I think I know what the problem is. I went ahead and muted my own microphone, and I guess that killed the audio. So I'm going to back up the video, and we will restart that.
Becomes reliable and
thank you all for letting me know.
Photographic purpose than photographs for art or photographs in to share with your friends, like a selfie. This photograph is clearly and intentionally made as evidence gathering. So the purposes require a certain discipline in order to get this, so that it becomes reliable and believable evidence. Now, that's the background. Where is the evidence gathered and how is it designed in making the photograph? The first point is what's noted on the slide that we have shared here with you previously. It is your eye and your brain that is making the photograph, not the camera. Your eye and your brain are seeing the potential of evidence, and then they are structuring this into a picture. Such a picture is different from a selfie, which says, I was here, and it puts you in another place. This type of photograph is taking the place and the experience, and it is putting that it is taking you out of the picture. So you have to use your eye and your brain. You have to design this photograph in order to bring forward the place and the evidence. So keeping that in mind, the first thing I want to stress is to know your equipment that you're using. Fancy equipment does not make a good photograph. You have to know the equipment you have. A mobile phone is every bit as good as a $1,000 camera for its purposes, if you know how to use the equipment. So it pays enormous rewards to learn your equipment. Now, that's just as important as if you were doing a survey and you had to develop a survey instrument. It's just as important as if you were out there and doing an interview and you had to establish a relationship with your participants that you were doing the interview with. So it is very, very important to know your equipment. And if it's a cell phone, it may be just as simple as learning how to push the button that takes the picture. But if it's a camera, there are very likely controls on the camera, and you should learn what those controls mean because they allow you to get better evidence. And such controls may affect the exposure of the picture. They can include hot spots in the picture, such as a window in the background that blurs out the picture itself because suddenly you've got too much light coming in. The ISO setting so it's the speed of the government. There are a variety of shutter controls, self-timers, and then on the cameras is what's known as the histogram, which shows you a picture of the radiance of the light in the picture you're taking. So if you have a camera that allows all those sorts of features, learn what they mean, because with them you're going to get a more reliable photograph that is going to allow you to bring forward the evidence in your picture. Now, what makes a picture? Very important. When I was watching the images and photographs that were coming forward in our class discussion yesterday, it was very clear to me that some people had gone to some effort to recognize the importance of light on themselves and their participation. Other people had lights on in the room or dark or side lighting in the room, and it made it very hard to see them. Now, if you're participating in a Zoom meeting from the other side of the world, it's to your advantage to have the light in your room where you are working show such that we can see you. It makes you come forward as a more active and a more interested and more expressive member of the class. And if that's true just for a class discussion on Zoom, it is especially true if you're trying to use the photograph as evidence. Now, this is light. The light that works in photographs is warm light. It's a long wavelength. And natural daylight, it's light typically before 10 o'clock in the morning or after 4 o'clock in the evening. But if you have artificial light, you can affect that. Lamps in the room turned on, windows that are on, can bring in and affect the light and the color and shape the evidence so that the evidence is viewable and believable. If you have any Questions about the use of light, too much or too little, always go darker. A person's eye is much more comfortable seeing a dark space than it is to see a space that we say is burned out, is the technical term, where there's too much light coming in. For instance, a lamp that's in the room that's directly in the photograph, or a bright window that's behind somebody. Now, if you're trying to illuminate something, if you're trying to show some evidence that's in the middle of the photograph, consider adding light. When I'm taking pictures professionally, I often just turn on a flashlight and have that pointing at the subject in the middle of this that I want to have emphasized in the picture. If it's a child, if it's a meeting, if it's something else that you want to draw the viewer's attention to, have some light, a reflector or a flashlight or something that's picking up and making that part of the picture more interesting. The other area about this, though, is it's very difficult on the eye, and it's very uninteresting to the eye to have straight-on light. So, for instance, a flash on the camera makes a person's face look flat. The sun behind a person makes the person's face look dark. So when you're adding this special light, consider and use angles that the light is coming to the picture rather than straight on. Light from the side, light from the up or down, all changes the shape. And so experiment and think. And go back to the early comment I made. Think about the direction that the light is coming from. Light and there's some areas that are really rather interesting. And so that is where you would put your camera in relationship to the light. If you're looking, for instance, down on a meeting, that is often one of the best ways of showing the meeting, to get your camera high and looking down on the meeting or on a subject. If you're looking from the side, it is often one of the best ways to add depth to the meeting, where you light up either half or a quarter of the face of a person. You'll have to experiment. There are technical names for these things. For instance, in the paper I show a Rembrandt name. Rembrandt means that Rembrandt's typical lighting with 3/4 of the lighting coming from one side and the other 1/4 being dark, so that it creates a feeling of depth. Hatchet means when it's sharp lighting from one side and one side is dark and the other side is light. But this requires some planning in the use of light. So the general point that I'm making is that the light makes the photographs, not the camera. Your head controls the light, and you're designing that in your brain, and it takes some intentional planning. It isn't just a matter of clicking the camera. Now I want to come to a very important point, the composition. Every photograph is at least 2 pictures. There's the subject and there's the background. Too often people focus on the subject and they forget that there's a background. Both are being captured by the camera. You have to position the subject in relationship to the background. Now, for instance, when you're coming on in a Zoom class, you could have a picture of yourself sitting in bed, and it would show you sitting in bed. The point is that suddenly all your classmates would know that you're either sick or you're lazy because you didn't get out of bed in order to come to class. we would see that the bed is there as the background. You want to, as a student, to show that you're coming to class in a mature way. So you pick the background that shows you that you're in your office, or that you're out in the field, or that you're someplace that shows that what you want to show about who you are. One is who you are, but the second part of this, the background, shows your social professionality. It shows your position, your location. It shows you at work. And in both of these, you have to be considering the light. You have to be using the light. You can have the light focus on you, but the light should also be illuminating, showing something on the background. And of course, there's always the additional issue of noise, because in most of our pictures, we are now with videos capturing sound, and so you want to be controlling the sound just as much as you're controlling the background photograph in the picture. Now, typically, you want to go close to the subject. You want to show the subject doing its thing. If it's a work project in the field, you want to show people working in the field. If you want to show people talking, you want to get close enough so that you can see them talking and see their face. Your camera is having to do what your brain would naturally do if you were in a real meeting. So you have to be moving the camera closer, usually, to focus on the action you want. Now, one of the other features that you really need to pay attention to is the idea of engagement. By engagement, I mean the engagement between the viewer who's looking at the picture and purpose that you have in showing the picture. You're engaging two subjects, the viewer who's looking at the picture and the purpose that you're using the picture for. This, again, takes thought. And it's one of those things that, among all these points, it is often good to write this point down. What is the purpose that I'm wanting to show? What is the way this picture is being used for evidence? How will the viewer engage this picture? So think about that. That's a critical part of the design. Now, I have down here noted that there are other purposes to a photo in the composition. Art. Jody, who's going to be participating as a discussant with this class, is an excellent wedding photographer. And for instance, if you're taking wedding pictures, as Jody can attest, you want to make it look artistic. You want to make the bride look beautiful. You want to make the situation look romantic. If you are taking pictures for a sporting event, you're trying to show action, and so you have to have camera angle. Or if you're trying to record something for history, you're also trying to position these pictures for a different purpose. Now, one of the critical things that you need to be doing as a social change photographer ties to this last point of history. And I should really have made this an additional point under this on the outline of the paper. One of the most powerful ways that you can use photographs is to show the history of social change. So when you when you make a picture for one purpose, to show a point in time with your project, consider going back a month later, a year later, even a week later, and taking that same situation and recreating it to show how the situation changed. A series of repeated photographs gives you a historical documentation of social change. And if you're trying to influence policies with a community, if you're trying to show leaders how your community has improved, If you're trying to show people that they were not present in a meeting, you just take a picture at one point that showed this situation and repeat that photograph a month or so later and show the composition of the same situation, but at a later point in time. Don't make a new picture if you're trying to talk and use the photograph for evidence. Repeat photograph in such a way that the photograph tells the story of history and no words are needed. Just two photographs side by side. Now, a last section on just how to make a picture and not take a picture. Some years ago, I worked as a photographer with the National Geographic. And that's where I learned this sequence that I'm running forward with you right now. When they said to me, this is how you make a picture. The first thing you do is you just use your camera and you grab the photo. You get it. You just pick up the camera and you grab the photo. You shoot it. A week ago, I was in the jungle east of Mount Everest. We were very high in the jungle at 3,000 meters, and all of a sudden, some wild boar ran across the trail in front of us. Now, the person who had the camera was so busy changing their lenses on the camera that they missed the photograph. This photograph would have been a very important one because it appears it's the highest that the wild boar animal has ever been shown photographed anywhere in the world at 3,000 meters. So the person should have just grabbed the camera, shot the picture, and it would have been a blur, it would have been the wrong lens, but we would have had a photograph. So you grab the photo and you shoot it and then you start making it. One of the great reasons for doing that is not only to get the picture at that moment of time, but then you can look at the picture and see whether it needs to go dark, see where the light is, avoid all the problems that have been mentioned above. You have actually a rough draft. It's like writing a paper, and you have a chance to improve. And that then leads you to the second step, which is to design the best background for the picture. Don't start with the foreground. It's easier to control the foreground. But go first in the making of the picture to the background. Move around. Adjust things. Maybe you want to bring some clothes in. Maybe you want to bring some other people into the background. Maybe you want to change the angle. Maybe whatever you want to do. Start by changing the background so that it shows the context for the photograph, because you're going to have to position the subject matter with the context. Then, once you fix the background, then you can start to explore the role of light on that background. You can say, I'm going to bring some more light in here. I'm going to use my flashlight. I'm going to open the window. I'm going to ask the person to start a fire. Whatever you're going to do to improve the light so that it makes this picture tell its story better. Then you move in closer on the subject. You start to deal with the subject and the purpose of the picture. And typically that the first thing to do is to come in closer so that you worked hard on the background and now you're taking the background out by bringing the foreground forward. And that is going to focus the viewer's eye on the subject. And very often, while you move in closer, you will find that it's good to lift your camera up. You move the camera up so that you're looking down a little bit. It's somewhat boring to look at a photograph that's exactly at eye level. And the best, most illustrative way, typically, to get a more interesting photograph is to lift the camera higher. Stand on something if you have a box or a chair to stand on. Lift the camera over your head and shoot down. That typically makes the picture much more interesting. It makes it sort of like a bird's eye view, so that it seems like you're observing something rather than looking at something. The shooting from up above, looking down, is more of the view, as I say, like a bird. You're observing something. Then get the subject moving. Most of the images we're taking, especially the ones that you will be using for your e-portfolios, have a video feature. And if you can show the action of social change happening in a moving, dynamic context, that is much more illustrative. It's bringing out more evidence than if it's just a straight, flat picture. So if you can have people talking, if you can have people actually doing social change, then you're going to be providing a lot more evidence than just taking a static photograph. Now, throw in a surprise. Make something where people laugh. Make something that is unexpected. By doing that, throwing a surprise when you can do that, even a flower that's in a picture, a flower bowl or something, it catches the eye. It draws the reader's attention, the viewer's attention. You don't want the viewer to be bored. You want the viewer to find your picture exciting. You want to find the viewer to say, that's interesting. And throwing in the surprise catches the viewer so that it draws them towards your subject. Now, then we get down into here. A photograph is not very interesting if the subject knows they're being photographed. If it looks like a rehearsed meeting rather than a real meeting where everybody's acting their part, the viewer won't believe the picture. If it looks like people are preparing and acting out the photograph, then you've lost the whole initial purpose of this photograph, which is its evidence. So you don't want the photograph to look staged. You want the photograph to look like you have created and made and found a place that is real, that was happening anyway, and the viewer is just lucky that you happen to be there and at that moment of time, and you captured that on film. But if it looks like this is an artificial picture that was made by the communications department or some sort of ad agency in order to advertise something, then suddenly the whole integrity of the picture is questioned instantaneously in the eye of the viewer. And let me just end now with what I have found to be a very important point. Time and again, people will say, smile, look at the camera, 1, 2, 3, stand up, I'm getting ready to take your picture. Well, of course, that makes it look like it's an artificial picture. The smile that is most important is the smile made by the photographer. If you are smiling at the audience, if you are laughing, if you are having fun as a photographer, then the people in the picture are going to be more relaxed, they're going to be more natural, they're going to be less artificial. And so what I have found is it's much more important the photographer be smiling than the subject in the picture is smiling. And typically, it's just the reverse. The photographer's very stern and says, now ready, everybody get ready. I'm going to take a picture now. 1, 2, 3, get ready, smile. Well, it's better if the photographer's smiling and the photographer's having fun, and then that relaxes the people in the picture. And they may smile, but they will do the most important thing, which is that they will relax. These are some quick outlines and suggestions to help you use photographs for evidence. Evidence gathering is one of the 3 most essential features And you need to be developing the skills of photography because it allows you to capture and make permanent the historical record of what you're doing. And if you have any questions, if you would like critiques on your photographic projects, please contact me separately. I'm happy to give you suggestions. This is something I've worked at for many decades, and I encourage you to work at it for many decades because it will make your work professionally much stronger. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. One quick question, and thank you so much for making the time to record this for everyone, and we're sorry you can't join us live today. But what are, in your opinion, could you go over one or two of the most common mistakes that you observe in people who are taking photographs in order to use as evidence of social change?
The number one mistake is that people have a lousy background. The background does not position the story. It is really, really important to focus on the second picture, which is the background in addition to the subject. The number two common mistake is that the photograph being taken is not repeated over time so that you're building a historical record, so that you're showing social change. Our degree is an applied community change. Change means point 1, point 2, point 3 in time, and photographs are the best way of describing those points. In order for that to happen, it has to be basically the same photograph repeated over time. People are not using the potential of repeat photography to document change over time. That's the second most common mistake that people make in using photography for community change. The third most common mistake is that people aren't paying enough attention to light and interest. Their pictures are frankly boring. They may get some credit, they may get the item done, but they haven't thrown themselves in emotionally into making this into something as a journalist would, or a TV photographer would, something that people want to look at. Because if you want people looking at it and enjoying it, then you're going to build community energy. The photograph is a fabulous way of building community energy. So you really have to try to make that an attractive picture. That's the third biggest problem. And the fourth biggest problem is that people don't work hard enough at it. They click the camera, they say, I've got the picture, and then they go and they stop. But it really takes working around with this, just as when you're writing a report, you have to write the report, you have to write it again, you have to improve the written text. The same thing is true with a photograph. It takes repeated efforts in doing it. So those 4 points, I think, are the ones the biggest problems with.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much, and I'm sure we will have a very engaging discussion, and we'll save some time here for Jody and others to give some input. And I once again appreciate you making the time for this recording. And as just to reiterate, that both myself as well as Daniel are here, and Daniel specifically would love to work with any of you on helping hone in photography skills as you are documenting applied community change. So once again, Daniel, thank you so much, and we will let you go.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with this class throughout. Thanks a lot.
Okay, well, that was the short video from Daniel, and I know, at least when I first saw it last night as he was recording it, as well as today, it's a lot of interesting points, and certainly. But before we kind of open it up for questions or comments or other discussion, Jody, I know that you have to get off the call before long and take care of some things. So in your remaining time on the call, as the other probably most experienced photographer on the call, but as Daniel noted, a very different type of photography. Do you have any additional comments or reflections on Daniel's presentation that you would share with the group, or about your experience working with digital photography?
Two of the most important things, well, three that I will hit on is, like he said, to watch your background, because that is one thing that most people do not focus on. They're mainly focusing on their subject. Because your background is being watched. It's very easily to not watch that, and you can easily, it's very distracting. Watch your lighting. Do not shoot your subject with light hitting them right in the face. It washes them out and you can't see your subject very well. And when you are editing your photo, make sure you save your original, just in case you accidentally make a mistake, then you do not have your original photo to start over.
But yeah, that last point is an absolutely great one. And I think we all have experienced, whether it's a paper or a photograph, but something we put a lot of work into and then we lose it. And as you say, I know from the very little bit of digital photography editing I've done, one wrong click of a button and you can ruin your whole project. And if you don't have it saved, well, you lost your photo. I know we have some other folks on the call who have some experience with photography or layout and editing. Naomi, Rosie, or Megan, do you have additional points to make? And also thank you, Jody, for being able to join the call, and feel free to hop off whenever you need. I know you've got some other things that you got to take care of. Does anybody else have any initial reflections or tips of advice building on Daniel's presentation, and then we can kind of open it up for a question and answer or discussion session?
Luke?
Yes, Megan.
Hi, it's Megan. So I was kind of thinking about some things to go over for people who might be using their phones, because I know often it's a lot easier to cart around than a camera and a lot more accessible. So just thinking about, I've got an iPhone, but I think it's similar for most. It's initially really important just to zoom in even a little bit, because it'll immensely fix the proportions. You want to make sure you always shoot head on. So like if your subjects are sitting and they're talking, don't just stand there and take a picture down, like crouch down. It's easy to forget when it's a phone. And then even just in the basic editing that your phone can do, a really good tip is to bring up your shadows and bring down your highlights. So if your sky is overblown, it'll make it look a little more blue. And if it automatically dimmed the foreground to make up for a bright background, bringing up the shadows will make everything kind of evenly lit. And those are just some really easy things you can do right from your phone that make your picture look nicer.
Yeah, absolutely. One I always forget, as you say, especially with the phone, it's so easy. You just kind of pull it out of your pocket. It's what Daniel was saying about get the photo. And that we often just, especially at least when I'm shooting with my phone, even though I've, done other better photography, I tend to kind of forget most of these, kind of tricks about taking a good photograph. And just do a point and shoot, and you, most of the time, both between the light and the framing, it's not a good photograph. So another one of the things I forget about the phone is that you can tell it, you can direct the subject of the phone by tapping on a different part of the screen. And so if you're actually taking a photo of one thing and the phone is automatically zooming in on the other, or thinking that's the subject, you can redirect the phone. And back to your point about zooming in on a touch screen, I've accidentally, in trying to zoom or frame the shot, changed the subject to the phone. And so I think all of this really goes back to one of Daniel's initial points. Let me put up that document that he had. But this notion of really knowing your equipment. And do not, for this, if you're documenting community change, I've seen this happen many times when I've gone to do field work, is somebody borrows a brand new camera from a friend, and because it's a nice camera, and then the person spends most of their time in the field. They obviously didn't bring the instruction manual, and that then they are spending all this time trying to learn the equipment, and they probably would have been better off to have just gotten a use their phone, use their old camera, and taken some time to practice with it ahead of time. So those are great tips about the phone, and I think increasingly you can take an amazing photograph on a phone. I have always been surprised how important that is to the manufacturers of phone companies. But you can take one, but it's really important to know your equipment, and also then, as you say, Megan, there are a number of features and tools built into the phone software that you just need to know how to use. Does it have a live video feature? Does it take HDR, which would be high resolution photos versus normal resolution photos? So a lot of things to remember about that. Do other people have additional tips or suggestions? And obviously, if you're a student and you've got some experience taking photographs, we'd like to hear from you as well. Or questions about this.
Hey, Luke. This is Rosie.
Hey, Rose.
Daniel kind of covered this, but I just want to reiterate that it is our institutional priority to try to capture photographs that show stories and show real day-to-day scenes of learning and action in the field. So I just see this time and time again with photos that our faculty and alumni take and are shared often on Facebook, which are the very stage, everyone smile for the camera picture. And I encourage our students to try to move away from that norm. It's so hard because we were raised to do that at family functions and in school even. So really try to capture those real life scenes. That's something that has been written in communications manuals that the institution has created in the past, and something that I think we really want to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it touches on a couple points that Daniel made, both in terms of that there are different purposes for taking photography. The advice we're giving you, while some of it is a good general tips for how to take a good photograph. For instance, you all probably see there's a lot of white light coming in to my right hand side, and it's distracting. It's distracting to all of you. I need to buy a new blind to fix that. But that's exactly the point, that even though I'm sitting in my office and I have curtains, but still I need to work on the background for my presentation on Zoom. And I think that those are the types of tips, framing, overexposure, that are always true. But also when we're thinking about using this for as evidence or documenting evidence, you really want to remember this idea that every picture has there's at least two pictures inside every photograph. There's the background and then there's the subject, and sometimes there's several other pictures in the background, and all of that is distracting, or that's you can't control what exactly people are going to look at if it's in the frame. Mm-hmm. But I also think your point, this then touches on, what you want in these photographs are you're trying to document applied community change. And so, as Rosie said, people sitting and looking directly at a camera are never doing applied community change. Maybe they're having a meeting, but they should be looking at each other. Nobody in a meeting turns around and looks at one thing unless it's a screen or a presenter. and that is a very boring shot.
And
So,
if I could,
yes.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I think like a very clear example of this, a lot of our students and our alumni's applied community change work occurs through trainings and workshops and that sort of thing. And they're often like repeat projects or events too. So they'll do a training with one community, go to another community, do a different training. And what normally gets captured through photography that at least then becomes publishable in some form on social media is the end of that. So it's the participants all smiling with their certificates, or at the end, you know, a handshake or something in that line. And so I want to encourage students to not think of capturing just the end, but the, you know, the story as it's unfolding. Yeah.
That's a great point. That's a great point, that you want to be, and I, like as Daniel said, you know, change, and we talk about this in ACC 601 a lot, is that with change, we're measuring progress or lack of progress. You know, you've heard me say, is energy level going up or is it going down? And so, as Rosie said, just capturing the end result doesn't help us gauge whether energy is going up or going down. And I did want to clarify one point that Daniel made, which is this idea that the photograph is not interesting if the person doesn't know they're being photographed. And I want to clarify, this does not mean taking their picture without their knowledge. It's very important to get people's consent to have their photograph taken. But what we mean by that is Rosie's point of, do not stage the photograph. The photograph should look natural. So you ask everybody at the beginning of a meeting, say, I'm going to take photographs. Please don't look at the camera, and then start taking them. In my experience, even if you've asked your subjects not to look at the camera, they will look at it for about the first 5 minutes and say, I'm meeting, because you're walking around, it's distracting. But then they get used to you, and that's when the really engaging or genuine photos start to happen. And then I will go back to this point. You know, you've heard it. Daniel made it several times. Jody made it again. As you know, it keeps coming up. I use the example of the lighting in the background. Most people don't understand that what makes a photograph is light. The whole notion, historic cameras were literally boxes of microfilm with a tiny little hole in them. And so what is captured is the different colored light beams. This is why black and white photography came before color. Is a mix of the light beams coming into an otherwise dark space and then being captured on the film. And so literally, photography is capturing the light. And that's essential to understand. And so this idea that light makes a photograph. Wade Davis, a friend and colleague of Future Generations, who's also a very, very, very accomplished explorer in residence at the National Geographic and photographer. He's released several photography books. And he says over and over again that photography is learning to write with light. And that's exactly what you're doing. And so I would also, another big tip, it kind of, Daniel went over it really early, quickly, but is the idea of the middle of the day. It has the brightest and flattest lighting. And therefore, it's a terrible time to take photographs. Generally, I know a lot, for instance, Daniel, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., he puts his camera away. Unless he's inside, or unless he can construct fake lighting. Because during those times, it's very, very, very hard to take a photograph that is where you can really write with the light. Because you want a long light spectrum. And so the times to get that, the best photographs are what they call the golden light hours. And those are from sunrise to around 9 o'clock, to sometimes 10 o'clock in the morning, and then in the evening. So sunrise and sunset, And even if you're not photographing the sunrise or the sunset, which is very beautiful sometimes, the light, as we all know, during that time becomes very vibrant. And so the quality of your photographs goes up instantly during those hours. Are there any other questions about this or other reflections? Do people understand what we mean? Well, just why we're going over this and the use of photographs. I'm happy to answer any questions, but as I said, all the time, this tool time is about just giving you some additional resources for those of you who want to work or hone an additional skill.
Luke, this is Dan. One question I had, I think Megan mentioned it. What does it mean to bring up the shadows?
Megan, do you wanna respond to that specifically?
Sure, I'm happy to. So do you want specific to an iPhone or in general? Or rather a smartphone or just in general?
Smartphone.
Okay, so you've got an iPhone, I know. So when you take a picture, you can go into your edit settings. So it's got drop-down menus for, let me actually get it pulled up. There's light, there's like color effects, and then I think there's filters. But light is actually a drop-down menu, and it lets you edit it more similarly to how it would be in a professional editing program. So when you do the drop-down, there's an option for shadows. And you'll see when you mess with the toggle, it'll drastically increase the brightness of your foreground in particular. So if you have to take a shot of something in the moment and it's backlit and your subject is dark, just bringing up the shadows can really help make that subject look more well lit and make it a better rounded photo in general. And it's just a quick, easy fix.
Very good, thanks.
Sure.
Great, thank you. I guess I knew you could do that, but this is, we've said this before, and don't be afraid to take a photograph because you don't think you have a good camera. Knowing your equipment is essential, and keep in mind that some of the best photographs in history were taken with much worse equipment. Yeah, we've got a hand raised. Look,
I'm wondering if there is any galleries like the samples. So if with the people who had never done it before can have a look of that and learn from that.
That's a great question. I'm glad we have Megan and Rosie on the phone. Do we have any immediate online repositories or on the website, guys, that we could direct folks to? Obviously, if not, we can put together a sample sheet as well. But do you guys know if there's anything already up?
Not that I can think of. Rosie?
We have many photos in our institutional records, but those have been sourced from many people, and I can't attest to their quality. So I think it would take a little bit of time just to get a good sizable sample.
Actually, I know where you look. So
there you go.
I will post after this session with the recording of today's video. I'm gonna post both Daniel's tip sheet, and then I will also make sure everybody has a link to what is already a great publication you should all look at, which is the Future Generations Quarter Century Report. And so we will link you to the digital PDF download for this, which showcases many of our institution's best photographs, including many by Daniel. And I think that'll give you a great snapshot of the different ways that you can use photography to capture Applied Community Change in action. Also, for those of you who haven't seen the Quarter Century Report, I think you'll be really interested to read that as well.
Great idea, Luke.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Any other questions? We're almost out of time, but I know we got started a bit late, so we can go over a little bit if people have questions. But otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Hello.
Yeah,
Professor, can I interrupt? So, regarding the photographer for the lighting, like I just have some experience, like especially when we try to market the community products, and then the product that we get from the communities are not very good. And then while we try to market their products, we try to use all the techniques which the professor here have said with the lightning and all. But the later using all those tips, and then the picture comes so nicely in the brochures. And later the complaint which we received from the customer was that the picture and the product doesn't match. So in that case, like, is that any tips where we can, especially for the products?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, and I think it going back up to that sounds to me really at the end of the day like there was a discrepancy because what had been taught was how to take a good photograph.
Yeah.
But what was and it's fine for anybody who wants to hop off. I see one or two messages in the chat. So what was focused on was how to take a good photo in that instance. But what they forgot was what is the actual subject of the photo, right? Why are we taking this photograph? So if you are taking a photograph that to document behavior changes in healthcare, but then all the photos you take are inside of a primary school classroom.
Okay.
You have a problem there, right? The photo that what the person was looking for, even if they're beautiful photos of smiling, happy children playing together, which makes people happy. Smiling children is a great indicator that the community is happy. But the problem is that in that instance, people are looking for a very specific thing to be documented in the photographs, which is women's health. Right, so they want to see pictures of women getting treated by a doctor or having an action group sitting in on a health class. They don't necessarily want to see these photographs of children going to school unless it's very clear that the children are being taught something about healthcare. So I think this is what probably it sounds to me from your description like that was an instance not so much of bad photographs, but that maybe even the people focused too much on taking a good photo and didn't sit back and think very first is, why am I taking this photo?
Okay.
What is this photograph of? So if you're taking photographs to document community change, well, you usually have a more specific type of change in mind that you're trying to show or that you're trying to document. And so you have to think very clearly at the beginning, and we'll talk about this more as we get into the idea of key indicators. But thinking about what am I actually trying to photograph? Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to see whether a conservation project worked in the environment, taking the same picture, a good picture of the same plot of land, as it either gets more or less jungle on it, okay, that is showing you change over time. But if you're taking a picture where there's no room or no chance for the environment to come into it, you're not actually capturing a meaningful type of change. It doesn't mean your photograph was good or bad. It just means that the people you're showing it to aren't interested in. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you, sir. One last question, sir.
Yes, please.
I also want to know, like especially when we use the pictures in the report and then the presentations, is there any particular size we need to keep in mind? Because in my case, what I used to do is when we use the photos in the report and then the presentations, the size can be very stretchable. So I don't know which one to focus. So is there any particular size that we can keep in mind?
Well, that's a really good question, Wongmo. Because as you said, and this is one of Jody, when Jody said save your original photograph, that is true for any type, because usually you want to take a photograph at the highest resolution possible. And then depending, you might need to make it smaller. And usually that is why you want to first save the original, because maybe you make it too small and the quality comes down. And then once you make it, once you lose it, you can't go back to it. So, but the rule, I think, is there's never a right answer. I can't give you a recommended size exactly. But I can say you're always needing to look at a trade-off between the size of the photo, the size of the file, right? Not even how big it is, but how big the actual file is. And then the quality of the photo. And there are certain, I think it is JPEG, is JPG files, that type of file. I think I'm right about this statement, but I can't, that it usually has the best, lowest file size to photo quality type. Rosie, Megan, do you know if that's true?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
That I'm pretty sure that JPEG is kind of considered, trade-off in file size for photo quality. It's kind of considered to have the best standard ratio if you're picking a file type. Is that, or am I just kind of making that up?
No, JPEG is the most consistent, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the easiest to use and to transfer. So it's not always going to necessarily be the highest quality, but it's your general best bet.
Yeah, okay. So that's one thing, Longmo, is to always make sure you're using a JPG file type and not some of the others that usually have take up more room. And the other thing I would say is if you're putting photos into a printed report, well, you're going to print them yourself, right? Or you're going to take them down to the local copy office, and they will make them. In which case, the size of the file doesn't matter. So go with the highest, the nicest photo you can. If this is a report you're going to email to somebody, you should remember that your total report shouldn't be more than about 4 or 5 megs.
Okay.
And the files, the easiest way, Word written text is tiny. So there's no reason, even a 100-page written Word document would never be over 1 megabyte, unless there were photographs in there. And the photographs can quickly take a half a meg report and turn it into a 10 megabyte report. And that's too large. So there's no universal answer, but I guess a couple tips would be that always think about the trade-off. How important is it to have a really nice photo here versus have a small file size? And there are certainly, anytime you're emailing a report, you need to go with a smaller file size. And so there's always that trade-off. And as Megan and I mentioned, the JPG file type is usually the most consistent and safest type of file for sharing with others.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to hold on. Oh, great. Wongmo, did you see in the chat window, Rosie has shared a great resource on the file types and using them. I'm going to actually put that into Daniel's document at the very bottom, which I will be sharing on the course page later today, so that others can also see that. Thank you, Rosie.
Sure.